This is the Muslim section of the Guildford Cemetery in Perth. There's one plot here that has a lot of meaning for me. One person that I never in a million years thought would end up here. This is my Uncle Nasser when he was in his 20s, doing his national service in the Egyptian army. He was my mother's youngest brother. Everyone in the building he grew up in downtown Cairo, knew him. He was a Mr. Fix-It.
من غير ما تطلبي يحس بيكي انتي عايزة ايه. يعني لو نور ضرب الحقني يا ناصر تلاقي ناصر ده في ثانية.
Nasser's parents died when he was in his late teens, and Mum spent years after that trying to get him to emigrate to Australia, where she'd been living since the early 70s. There was nothing for him in Egypt, no jobs, no future, not even with a geology degree. I remember when he was finally accepted for emigration to Australia. I was living with him and his sister, my Aunt Wafat, in Egypt at the time. He was 30 and had never been overseas in his life. All his friends were in Cairo. It was his world. He and his friends had planted a garden outside the apartment building, the only greenery for miles. Nasser was in charge of looking after it. I sat with him while he was packing his few things to leave. I asked why he wasn't taking everything he had in his closet. He looked at me in this questioning way and said, "What, I'm not coming back?" Now I'm back in Cairo again for the first time in years, and all I can think of is him, whether it would have been better for him to die and be buried here rather than in Australia. In Egypt, the main graveyard is the City of the Dead. It stretches for miles. It's called the City of the Dead, but it's a living city. There's anywhere between 500,000 and 5 million people living here, in and among the graves. Cairo has a major housing problem, which was made worse by an earthquake in 1992. People can't afford a place to live, so they come to the City of the Dead, which in Arabic is just called El Arafa, the cemetery. It's hard for me to understand. I was born in Egypt but came to Australia as a baby and grew up in Perth. Perth is like heaven, like a calm oasis compared to Cairo. I was 10 when I first came back to Egypt. My grandmother had just died here. I remember there was a lot of wailing and screaming. I hid under the bed in the room she'd died in because I was scared. Afterwards we went to visit her in El Arafa, in our family crypt. In the past, women were often barred from visiting the Arafa because the loud wailing and dramatics of some of them were considered unbecoming to a Muslim. But now it's generally acceptable for them to go, as long as the proper rules are observed.
أي حد يموت غير عندنا نصوت ونعيط ونبهدل نفسينا. بنبهدل نفسينا. نقعد 3 أيام ناكل بالعافية، نشرب بالعافية. واخده بالك ناكل بالعافية ونشرب بالعافية.
فكان بيقعدوا يقروا القرآن، مثلا يقولوا ايه ستي او جدتي كانت بتحب سورة الرحمن، فكانوا دايما يقولوا ايه السورة اللي هي كانت بتحبها قوي كانوا بيقروها لها، لان هم طبعا احنا كلنا عارفين او احنا كلنا معتقدين ان الناس اللي مدفونة في الارض تحت دول كلهم بيحسوا بينا وبيسمعونا بيشوفونا، لكن احنا لا بنسمعهم ولا بنشوفهم.
فرق الفطير ونفرق فلوس ونفرق على الغلابة، يعني اللي نعرفهم انهم غلابة ومحتاجين.
Death is a part of life in Egyptian culture. People discuss it every day. Maybe it's because Egyptians have always had a fixation with death and the afterlife. In Islam, everything one does in life is to pave the way to death, to the next life. The difference is that unlike the ancient Egyptians, Muslims don't believe they can take anything with them, only good deeds. So tomorrow I'm going to the Arafa, the cemetery, for the first time since I was 10 years old. My mum and my aunt and my cousin are all coming with me, and they also haven't been for a long time. And I'm not really sure what to expect, but I'm looking forward to seeing if it's the way that I remember it. The City of the Dead, El Arafa. The dead here aren't buried in the ground like they're supposed to be under Islamic law. People are still buried like in ancient times, in underground rooms. Each crypt has a separate room for men and one for the women. It's like a compound, and to visit, you have to find the crypt keeper and pay him to get the key to enter your family's enclosure.
عايزة بعد إذن حضرتك المفتاح بتاع حشم وشربات. شوية نقعد وتعالى اقرا زي ما أنت عايز. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. دي شيرين اللي بقول لك عليها، الست اللي هم الاوفر اور في الهاي كلاس دول، فدولت اللي ميته لسه قرايب، دي كده من حوالي سنتين. دي هم اللي عملوها بركات صالح، عملوها كده. دي مكتوبه ايه؟ صالح حسن. الحجيره طبعا المفروض ان من ناحيه الشرع بتاعنا او الدين بتاعنا المفروض ان انا ما اكتبش كده، لكن هم الناس اتعرفوا على ان هم يعملوا كده، بقى عرف وحاجه كل الناس بدات تعملها. بقت عاده وتقاليد ان هم يكتبوا ايه، ايه قرانيه لا حول ولا قوه الا بالله العلي العظيم، وكاتبين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ان الابرار لفي نعيم، ايات من القران، وكاتبين اسم المتوفي اللي هو تحت في الارض هنا، وكاتبين التاريخ بتاعه بالهجري وبالميلادي او الفرنجي. فكاتبين هنا كذا واحد من الاموات اللي مدفونين في المدفن ده. طبعا في ناس طبعا مش مكتوبه، لان في ناس بتستحرم انها تكتب او تقول لك ان هنا كده. هنا زي ما انت شايفه صالح اللي هو خالك الله يرحمه، وهنا زي ما انت شايفه برضو محمد حسن برضو واحد من العيله من الاسره، وده واحد من الاسره. يا رب اغفر لهم يا رب سامحهم يا رب.
It feels like being in a kind of like in a house or in your own backyard. So it's got a really peaceful sort of a feeling. It doesn't feel like the cemetery in Australia, which is just completely sort of a cold place. But this is somewhere I feel like I can understand how people could have sat here all day for hours. Nasser was more like a big brother or cousin than an uncle to me. I never called him uncle. He taught me to play backgammon and took me for rides on his scooter to buy Egyptian sweets. He also got on my nerves, borrowing my U2 cassette tapes or telling me I shouldn't go out so much. But he tried to be cool because I was his niece from Australia and he wanted us to be friends. Nasser is buried here alone in the Muslim section of the Guildford Cemetery. I'm ashamed that I've only been to visit him a couple of times over the years. He died 5 months after arriving in Perth, ready for his new life. He was only 30 years old. No one knows what killed him. The autopsy said natural causes. Egyptians wear black as a sign of mourning, usually for 40 days. But in the case of older women, they tend to wear it for the rest of their lives. It's a cultural thing. When Nasser died, I caused a small scandal by refusing to wear either colour or to stay at home. Instead, I went to the old bazaar at Khan Khalili and got my ears pierced a second time. The home I'd lived in with Nasser and Wafat was now filled with mourning strangers, and I couldn't shed tears with them there. I had a more Western reaction, wanting privacy, to be alone. I know he felt really lonely when he came to Australia. His English wasn't very good, and he didn't have anyone his own age to talk to or hang out with like he did back home. I guess Perth was a kind of bitter paradise for him. The one time I spoke to him on the phone, he said he couldn't get over how quiet it was. Nasser's death was a big shock to everyone, one of the worst times of my life. My Aunt Madiha has never really gotten over losing her favourite sibling.
أو المكان اللي بدفن فيه بيبقى كل الجيران اللي ميتين جنبي انا ببقى ممكن ما اعرفهمش ممكن اعرفهم، فاذا انا لما اموت ويبقى جنبي امي وابويا واخويا كاني ميته او صاحيه في وسط اسرتي. ناصر اخويا دوت كان راح استراليا علشان يقعد مع اخته، فمات طبعا هناك في استراليا واتدفن في استراليا. فطبعا انا كان نفسي يجي يدفن هنا في وسطينا، لان حسب ما احنا برضو بنحس ان انا لما باجي ازوره في المواسم او بزوره في اي وقت بحس ان هو حاسس بيا. فهو لما اتدفن بعيد عني انا حاسه ان انا مش عارفه ازوره، مش عارفه اكلمه، لان انا لما بدخل المدافن لما بقول له السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته بحس ان هو سمعها مني وشايفني. طبعا انا كده لا هشوفه ولا هيسمعني، صحيح انا من بعيد ممكن ابعت له السلام وربنا طبعا اكيد بيحسسه، ولكن في فرق لما نكون انا وهو حاسين ببعض في نفس المكان. بس مش
I've dreamt of Nasser over the years. In one dream, he was dressed in a white robe and was smiling the biggest smile, asking me, "How are you?" In another, when I was going through a tough time in my life, he appeared walking beside me on a black and white street and told me, "Remember, the most important thing is God."
إحساسي بقرا له الفاتحة وكلها تراب ربنا، كلها تراب عند ربنا، ويمكن مدافن هناك أنضف من عندنا، يعني شيء أحسن من شيء يعلم ربنا.
Sometimes I wonder where I'll end up, here or there. I don't feel like I belong in either. I thought that if I die in Perth, at least there'll be someone to keep Nasser company. But there are no family crypts here to bring people together. We'd all be in separate places, just as we were in life.